late 1988, ads started popping up in print media offering for people to become an Atarian for 15 American dollars. Your 15 American bucks got you a t-shirt, a sew-on patch, a laminated ID card, and 6 issues of the official Atarian Magazine. And that's on top of discounts on games, contests, prizes, and don't forget, fun, fun, fun! I'd love to find one of these shirts or patches, or heck, even a laminated ID card. But what I have found, and I've had in my collection for a couple years now, are the only 3 issues of the Atarian Magazine to hit the newsstand. So that means Atarian Club members were stiffed out of 3 issues of the Atarian Magazine. Bummer. So what was the Atarian Magazine like, and was it worth reading for fans of the Atari consoles back in 1989? Well, we're going to dive deep into the first magazine, but I want to try to give as much background as possible about how the magazine came to be. And there really isn't much out there regarding its history. It was definitely a vehicle created to push Atari's games and consoles at the time, a push that Atari Corp really seemed to make in 1989 and 1990. Better late than never. The Atarian Magazine was the last magazine from computer and gaming magazine pioneer David Ahl, AHL, and was spun off from the Atari Explorer magazine, the company's in-house computer mag. Its purpose was to appeal to a much younger demographic, similar to the one Nintendo Power had cultivated. And that's because Atari Explorer definitely skewed to the much older. Dave was an author of 22 published books, including Basic Computer Games, which was the first million-selling computer book, along with books on vehicles and military stuff. He founded Creative Computing magazine in 1974, which was the world's first personal computing magazine. It's a shame that his last effort didn't produce much success, but it was honestly too little too late from Atari. And that's about all I could find out on the history of the magazine, so let's look at the premiere issue. Again, the Atarian was clearly Atari Corp's answer to the Nintendo Fun Club letter, which later became Nintendo Power. The Atari console-based magazine would come out bi-monthly and would cover games from the 2600, 7800, and XEGS game system. The first issue has a newsstand date of May/June 1989, which probably meant this thing hit mailboxes around March of that year. The first issue features a superhero with the Atari Fuji on the front of his costume, and the magazine states that there's a contest to name this superhero. Besides that, the cover promises in-depth reviews of Impossible Mission, Summer Games, Tower Toppler, Crime Buster, Secret Quest, Double Dunk, Fight Night, and the always exciting Karateka. They also have first looks at Commando, Rampage, Double Dragon, Ikari Warriors, Xenophobe, and Pete Rose Baseball, as well as an interview with Nolan Bushnell. It really sounds like this magazine is brimming with content, yet it feels so thin in the hands. That's because the magazine is no more than 25 pages long, but as I've heard all my life, size doesn't matter. It's what you do with it. So let's see what Atari did with the pages inside their first issue. The inside cover promotes the Atari Advantage, an offer you would receive in select games in the form of a poster. With receipts and UPC codes from the boxes, you could get a t-shirt with 5 game purchases, a free game from a select list with 10 game purchases, a 7800 for $25, or your choice of XE or disk drive for $50 with 25 cartridge purchases. The page next to this one gives a welcome blurb and tells you which pages include each review and article, along with some credits for the magazine. I don't plan on hitting everything in this issue, but I find the next 2 pages really interesting. These pages include the mailbag and the top 30. The letters from the mailbag are of dubious origins, to say the least. Derek Jacobs from Fort Worth, Texas writes that he wanted an NES but got a 7800 instead. He was amazed at how much better the 7800 games were, and how all the friends who has the crappy old NES now come over to play the 7800. The editor responds that he's obviously biased, but he thinks the Atari systems are better too. This is the start of a couple different shots at Nintendo found throughout this issue. Then there's a few more letters about the XE crossbow port, where and how to find 2600 games, and Cody Myers from Kaufman, Texas tells about his 3D maze game that he designed, called Nars Domain, and tells you about the weapons, layouts, etc. The editor sort of panders to him and tells him his game looks interesting. I guess he enclosed a map or something with the letter, but they didn't publish it. They talk about some upcoming contests to design a game that I'm not sure ever came to be. But let's look to the page to the right of the mailbag. The top 30 lists off the top 10 games for the 2600, XE, and 7800 game systems, making for a grand total of 30. You send a postcard with your top 5 games to the Atarian, and they rank them by giving your first game 5 points, second game 4 points, and so on. 34 years later, some guy would steal this idea by polling people on Facebook and ranking the games in the same manner as mentioned in the Atarian Magazine. Guy sounds like a loser. Anyway, here's the link to that video I made. Anyway, let's move back to the top 10 lists. Pole Position got the top spot for the 2600, and that's not a game I'm too familiar with. Mario Brothers appears on all 3 lists, being third for the 2600, first for the 7800, and second on the XE. Remember, Mario Mania was in full swing at this time. 7800 games in order from 1st to 10th was Mario Brothers, Real Sports Baseball, Miss Pac-Man, Choplifter, One-on-One Basketball, Tower Toppler, Karateka, Centipede, Donkey Kong Jr., and Hat Trick. And well, those certainly are some choices. The XE list includes games like Ace of Aces, Donkey Kong Jr., Crystal Castles, Fight Night, and Necromancer. I always really liked lists like this, even in later magazines like the official PlayStation magazine that listed off the best-selling games for that month. I always thought this stuff was kinda cool. As we flip over to the next page of the magazine, we see a 2-page spread on previews, and this would have been an awesome part of the magazine for myself. None of the games get much more than a paragraph and maybe one blurry screenshot, but some don't even get the screenshot, honestly. Games covered are Commando for the 2600, 7800, and XE, Rampage, Cracked, Ikari Warriors, Double Dragon, and Xenophobe. All of those games had 7800 ports and either a 2600 port or an XE port. Each game gets a short overview of what you can expect while playing, and they called Crack egg-citing. Gross. The next page features 2 more previews, including the excellent 2600 Roadrunner and the 7800 version of Pete Rose Baseball from Absolute. Below that, they explain how sports stars are endorsing their Atari games and give stats on each player. Pretty neat little section, honestly. Next, we have an interview with Atari's founder, Nolan Bushnell, and it's there to push a new game that had his involvement, Secret Quest. Nolan talks about the state of the gaming industry, how the 2600 games are much more advanced than they were in the early years of the console, and informs people on the importance of math and science for people wanting to develop video games in the future. He also gets into his background quite a bit. It's a pretty cool little interview. Feel free to pause the screen and read it a little bit more. It ends with the review of his 2600 game, Secret Quest, and it's one that I can tell was influenced by Zelda. And this is where it becomes clear that the reviews aren't really reviews at all, but more like in-depth explanations of gameplay and what to expect while playing. And that's fine, but I would have preferred some sort of actual score and maybe talks about the quality, the graphics, the sound, etc. And I understand the magazine is meant to push Atari software, but even a Nintendo Power pretended to do reviews. So because of that, I'm going to skip over the reviews a little bit. I'm going to pop up a few images of each page of each quote-unquote review, and you can kind of read them or sift through them if you're interested. But they're basically fluff pieces that tell you more about how to play the game than whether or not you should purchase them. As we flip through the mag, take notice that there really isn't any advertising. There's one little half page about telegames, and that's really it in the whole review section. This has to be one of the major downfalls of the Atarian, as magazines mostly live or die off of advertising. And I've seen it stated that advertisers saw little to no benefit in advertising to Atari's young player base at the time. We then get a write-up on the Atari XE game console and what it could do. But the truth is the XE was an Atari 8-bit put into a new shell and made to hook to your television. Jack Tramiel, according to an interview with Michael Katz that I found in the Atari 2600-7800 Visual Compendium, was really excited for the XE and saw it as more valuable than either the 2600 or the 7800. He wanted Katz to push it hard, even after it was explained to him that they were essentially competing with themselves by having 3 consoles on the market at the same time. I personally feel Atari needed to focus on either the XE or the 7800, but that's going beyond the scope of this video. At the bottom of this page, we also get details for the contest to name the hero. The next 3 pages are strategies for Necromancer, Donkey Kong Jr., and Desert Falcon, and honestly, some of these are really valuable. I always thought Necromancer looked cool and wished it had seen some sort of 7800 port. Donkey Kong Jr. is a great game, but the guide seems a little lackluster. The Desert Falcon guide includes a large table going over the hieroglyphic combinations. This is huge, as there are so many to get, and not all of them do something useful. By far, the most valuable information for a 7800 player such as myself. Right next to the Desert Falcon guide, we get a half-page advertisement for Froggo games. Froggo released Water Ski and Tank Command on the Atari 7800, and released a handful of re-release titles on the 2600. The most interesting thing to note is the 7800 games coming soon. Pyromania, Scorpion Squad, UFO, and Night of the Ninja. I wonder if these would have been any better than their first 2 efforts. Below that, the editor asks readers to do their job for them, and maybe they'll get a game package and some recognition. That's right, they want you to edit the magazine for them after the fact. Fun, fun, fun! The tips and tricks section is really neat, and again, it's one of the more useful sections. And I have confirmed with somebody that actually wrote in and gave some tips and tricks, so I know these came from actual people. Aaron Rodriguez reached out to me and informed me that 2 of his tips were published this issue. One for Joust and one for one-on-one basketball. Atari states that they'll send a free calculator complete with Fuji symbol to anybody that gets their tips printed. But Aaron was neither able to confirm or deny if he received such a thing. I mean, it was more than 30 years ago after all. I feel that this, along with the letters, top 30, previews, and some of the strategies were pretty valuable information for the time. There's also a 1-panel black and white cartoon in the corner of the page about an arcade game named Sorcerer. That's okay, but it's the next cartoon that I'm really interested in, because this might be one of the most insensitive things I've seen Atari publish up to this point. Before we get into this insensitive thing from Atari, remember to subscribe to the channel. Chances are, if you made it this far, you'll enjoy the rest of my content, and subscribing helps way more than you'll ever know. Okay, the last bit I wanted to talk about is the full-color, 2-page comic at the end of the magazine. It starts innocently enough by showing the Atari factory happily producing games, consumers happily buying games, and then playing them. But then, production on Atari's newest game drops in half quickly, and then half again, and then in half again. A well-paid, respected, and happy Atari employee states that there's something wrong here, causing Milo Mender, mild-mannered Atari troubleshooter, to jump into action. "What's happening?" he says. "I was hoping you could tell us." As they troubleshoot the issue, we cut to an aircraft floating high above the Atari facility, and it's shooting a tractor beam of sorts down to it. And here we are introduced to the squinty-eyed, gap-toothed villain of the story, the evil Ninja Endo. Yes, Ninja Endo. Look at him. So evil. My God, this is blatant. I mean, I'm not the biggest Nintendo fan or anything, but this is somehow silly, insensitive, and sort of great. Sega notoriously took on Nintendo by bashing them in some of their advertisements, but this seems like a whole new level. Oh yeah, and it turns out that Miles Mender is our nameless hero. He flies up and gets hit by a ray from the aircraft, and then beats up the people in the aircraft and saves the day. In future issues, this hero is only referred to as the Atarian, as far as I can tell, and Ninja Endo only becomes more stereotypical and offensive. I know I should speak out against how offensive these are to people of Asian descent, and I'm sorry, but this is so corny, how can you be offended by it? I mean, it's offensive in the dumbest way, honestly. Nice try, Atari. Stay classy. And that's it, really. You get some advertisements, a few puzzles, and the issue is done. We can look at the final 2 issues if there's enough interest in a later video. But they all follow the same format for the most part, with the addition of maybe 1 or 2 new sections or articles. Atarian went on for only 2 more issues and folded quickly thereafter. While numbers from the newsstand is something I couldn't find, or their subscription numbers, it's very apparent that advertisers weren't very interested. And if you don't have advertising money, you don't really have anything, unfortunately. But I hope you guys enjoyed this look at what Atari was doing to combat the Nintendo juggernaut at the time. It wasn't much, but it's a piece of Atari history that doesn't deserve to be forgotten. This has been John, aka Silverback, aka the Pro System Gamer, and I just want to say, keep it retro.